What's good, football fans? And once again, I'm back at you for the 17th football season right here. And right now, this team, just like every other team in the entire league, is sitting here at 0-0. No wins, no losses. And it's a completely fresh slate with this franchise. New ownership team, and now you've got a completely new coaching staff. And I wanted to come on today and kind of grazed over the coaching staff hires. You know, there was a few there that I really wanted to touch on, and a couple that I didn't really know a whole lot about. And I already made a video talking about Dan Quinn being hired, and I know a lot of people, at least at first, were really against the Dan Quinn hire, or maybe they were just not over enthused about it. I think a lot of people, including myself, tend to remember the bad things instead of trying to focus on anything positive, especially when it comes to this football team. But, you know, at the opening press conference, Dan Quinn really went in on about how this was viewed to him as a second chance, and how he really spent a lot of time trying to find out what he did wrong the first time around and how he wanted to better that. He actually hired people to, you know, dig into what he did wrong. I really truthfully believe that this is a job he wanted to. You know, he went on and spoke about how out of all the positions that were available, that the Washington job was one that really stuck out. One thing's for sure, the guys that he started going around and plucking out for assistants are definitely capable of doing the job. And that's really, I think, what led, you know, the brass to him. You know, the fact that the idea that he could be a leader that they were looking for, somebody that could build a really good staff and maybe do some things with a young team, which is what they're going to get. You know, on the offensive side of the ball, he went out and he got a guy in Kliff that's kind of looked at, or has been looked at, as one of the up-and-coming bright minds in quarterbacking and whatnot. I believe he spent 4 seasons in Arizona. And I really think it's hard to judge him as an offensive coordinator by his time in Arizona, because it was his first time being a professional coach, and maybe he bit off a little bit more than he should have chewed. And that front office over in Arizona did some, you know, it was just a weird process they went through when they took Kyler Murray and, you know, brought Kingsbury, who had never really been all that successful of a head coach in college either, up with, you know, Kyler, and then it just didn't work. I think it more so had to do with them never establishing an offensive line that could withstand, you know, a whole bunch of injuries. I know I have a couple of Cardinal friends, and all they ever talk about is all the injuries that team has been through the last 4 or 5 years. But I know everybody instantly was thinking, you know, oh no, they're going to move up to Caleb Williams now because they got Kingsbury. He was, you know, a coach for Williams last year. Ultimately, I have no clue what will happen, but his offense actually, you know, it's something that's being used more in college football, and it's actually something that Drake May has used before, and it's something that Sam Howell has used before. So you really need to keep an eye on this situation, because, you know, they may select somebody in the draft and they may not. We're going to have to see how this all works out. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that the good money is still on them taking a quarterback in this upcoming draft, but it is what it is. I really felt like Dan Quinn knocked it out of the park with the Joe Witt Jr. hire at defensive coordinator. Now, I know a lot of people were grumbling that, you know, this guy has never seen, you know, the coordinator position, and that, you know, he's a virtual unknown when it comes to that. You know, never being above a position coach situation. He was the passing game coordinator over in Atlanta, and he's the guy that I think that Dan Quinn feels very comfortable with. You know, he's been like his right-hand man, or one of his right-hand men, you know, the last few seasons over in Dallas. He's a guy that they work well together. They know each other. And I think Dan Quinn is happy to be able to give Joe Witt his chance to be able to move up through the ranks. And I know that they tried to get Al Harris and a couple other coaches from Dallas as well, but they were blocked. That's an interesting thing there as well, because I think, you know, ultimately that may end up coming back to bite them, or to haunt them, I should say, because I believe Harris's contract is up next year, and he has already said that he is going to follow wherever Dan Quinn goes. So next year when his contract comes up, if Dallas is not ready to offer him a defensive coordinator position, then I could see him just leaving and making the shift over with Dan Quinn. Right now he's nothing but an assistant secondaries coach. I know a lot of people like Al Harris and what he can do for a secondary, especially the fact he's a former player, and it looks like the current players all look to him and listen to him. But ultimately, the reason why this was a really good move is because not only does it help start in the building of a defensive staff for Washington and an identity through Quinn and through Witt, but it also tears another piece off of Dallas. Now, the Cowboys were going to hire Joe Witt Jr. as their defensive coordinator. Now, I know that there's absolutely no way for me to put 100% stamp on that, but it's been said by every Cowboy insider that that was the guy. He was going to be the guy that was going to replace Dan Quinn. And just like the defensive coordinator position hire was a home run, in my opinion, the Larry Izzo hire at special teams coordinator was probably a grand slam. Now, this is a guy who was one hell of a special teams player when, he was in the league, and then once he became a coach, he's been on some really good units. He's headed up some really good units. Seattle the last 2 or 3 years has been a top 10 special teams unit. They've been one of the better teams in the league, and he's from the area. He went to high school in Ashburn before his family ended up moving to Houston, I believe. And the first guy that's a layover from Ron Rivera's staff is Tavada Pritchard. And I know a lot of people have beat up the idea of this guy staying with the team, but it's because a lot of people don't realize how sought after he was last year in the process and how sought after he is this year in the process. This guy is viewed as one of the next bright minds coming up in the game. One of the next, maybe even head coaches, definitely offensive coordinators around the league. He came in last year with Eric Bieniemy, and the idea was they were going to try to couple him with Sam Howell and see what they could get out of it. Now, I believe that we saw some good things with Sam Howell in the season, but obviously, it hit the skid somewhere and some things started going wrong. But I feel like, keeping Pritchard around is a pretty good move, actually. Now, going and hiring Bobby Johnson, OG Bobby Johnson, but going and hiring Bobby Johnson, the guy that just got fired after 2 years in New York, is a little bit of a head scratcher for me. The Giants gave up 85 sacks last year. Now, I realize that the Giants had tons of people injured. They had people, from the street and beyond playing on their offensive line. So that's why a lot of that was happening. And I also realized that they went through the quarterback carousel last year. But the fact of the matter is I believe they gave it the second most, or it might have been the third most sacks in the history of the game. I know that line right there, history of the game, thins out the more weeks they add and the more games they add each year. But still, it means something at this point. Last year, having Johnson coach the worst unit in the league, and then sidestepping and coming to Washington and going to last year's second worst unit in the league is a bit of a head scratcher on the surface. Now, I know a lot of people immediately think, well, didn't Buffalo have a good line? Well, the fact is their line actually got better once he left. Something tells me that this guy just fits Dan Quinn's personality or his spot. I know I saw a video on Twitter where they were showing him at practice, and he's always livid. He's always, loud and in the teaching mode. And I know a lot of his terminology sounds an awful lot like Dan Quinn's terminology. You listen to him talk, he sounds a lot like, Adam Peters and Dan Quinn. He talks about a line vision and several other things. And this is videos from 2 or 3 years ago. So maybe it was just a connection there. We'll have to wait and see. It kind of sucks, but I have to tell you this, though. The team is going to improve the offensive line as it pertains to, getting guys in the draft and signing guys or whatever the case may be. So that unit is going to improve no matter what. And the guy they had in control last year was just absolutely horrible. And he was actually way in over his head. He should have never have been the offensive line coach. But Ron Rivera, instead of going out and doing a coaching search, decided to just promote within and promoted his assistant coach who had never been an offensive line coach. But so here we are. The next one's a tight end coach, and I don't know an awful lot about him. I believe that you pronounce his name David Ray. The main thing I know about him is that him and Kingsbury have a couple of connections, I believe with the Cardinals and with Texas Tech. So he's obviously a guy that connects well with, our new offensive coordinator. But at the same time, he's never been a tight end coach. And I realize that in this league that we're in now, wide receivers, tight end, it's not a whole lot of difference. Old school football, you want to teach your tight ends how to block a lot more. So I guess besides maybe some blocking techniques, but at any rate, I don't think it's going to be all that big of an issue for him to be able to transition. And the next guy we picked up, he probably will end up being the passing game coordinator. Brian Johnson was Philadelphia's offensive coordinator last year. And the crazy thing is during the coaching process last year, he was actually viewed as a head coaching candidate. A few other things, he was like kind of a hot commodity, a hot name as the guy that, brought Jalen Hurts up. And he was promoted to an offensive coordinator position with Philadelphia. And then, of course, they had their slide this year where they lost all those games in a row toward the end of the year, and then they bowed out in the playoffs. And I felt like they needed scapegoats, and they definitely got them. I believe they gutted their whole coordinator staff, I believe, and kept the head coach. I was actually kind of scratching my head, like they go from being a team that wins all these games to a team that's just gutting their head coaching staff already again. But anyway, getting Brian Johnson, I feel like, is a good thing. Again, one of, an up-and-coming mind in the game. I feel like maybe we kind of stole him away because they were in a situation where they had to have somebody, quote-unquote, pay for the team falling off. And Sirianni kind of used him as the scapegoat. But to be able to gauge the hire, I really have to know what position he's going to take. And if it's passing game coordinator, I think that that's a perfect position for him. You put him in with the quarterback, and you see what you get. Still an unknown which direction they'll go as far as quarterback goes, but whoever, the guy is, he's going to get coached up. And without a doubt, my favorite two position coach, guys here, Ken Norton Jr. hired as the linebackers coach. Norton's a hard-nosed guy, old school, has won as a player, won as a coach, and his dad was one tough SOB as well. Those that don't know, educate yourself. The man was one hell of a boxer. Some familiarity there with him and Quinn as well. And of course, bringing Ryan Kerrigan back to the mix. This is Kerrigan's, I believe, third year coming in. And his position is going to change a little. It's going to shift a little to assistant linebackers coach and pass rush specialist. And, seeing Norton come in and then seeing Kerrigan's role shift makes me wonder, and don't get me wrong, I realize that base 3-4 and 4-3 packages are a thing of the past, but it makes me wonder if some ideas in the 3-4 aren't planned because they literally are calling him an assistant linebackers coach, and that's what he played in 3-4. To be continued when we see more on the field, which is going to be months away. But for now, I'm happy to see Kerrigan's name back in the mix. I was happy to see Ron Rivera give him a shot, but at the same time, I always question how much further he would have gotten in the pecking order because I know that Rivera has his guys. The defensive backs coach and passing game coordinator, Jason Simmons, that they signed from Vegas, I believe, from the Raiders, is a guy that spent time on the sidelines with Joe Witt. The new defensive coordinator wants to bring in some people that make him feel comfortable, then I believe that's what he should do. Now, Simmons is a former player, and he actually has a pretty decent resume. As it turns out, him and Witt were on that Green Bay Packers staff that Mike McCarthy was the head coach on. That, by the way, won a Super Bowl. Now, the last coach that has been hired so far was John Pagano, and those that know who Chuck Pagano is from the Colts, this is his brother. And this guy has been around the league quite a bit, but definitely here recently, more so out there in the AFC West. But he's been a defensive coordinator several times over. And having him come in as just being a senior defensive assistant, just a guy that's helping with the process, I think is going to be a big asset and something that the football team really has needed a lot more of. Don't think of it as another cook in the kitchen. Think of it as another person in the kitchen watching the line. Overall, I think Dan Quinn did a hell of a job with the assistants he put together and rounding his staff out. I realize there's a couple of more position coaches that need to be hired, and I realize that, you know, we'll have to look at those guys individually to see what they bring to the table as well. But right now, I'm actually fairly comfortable with this staff right here, and I can kind of start to get an idea of maybe where this offense is going to go, and you know, maybe where the defense is going to go. And for those that think that Kingsbury does nothing but throw the ball, you're actually dead wrong. You should go look again. He has a run-heavy air raid system. I know that makes no sense, but go look it up and look at the numbers the team put up, because I'm letting you know right now, they were in the top 10 in a lot of categories. As I said before, their issue was really injuries and luck. That franchise has zero luck. And I think they found themselves in a transition period after Fitzgerald retired, where just nothing was going right. But I'm old enough to have watched the Cardinals, you know, being in St. Louis and then go to Arizona. And one thing has always kept intact, except for the Kurt Warner's years, is, you know, they're always going to be the Cardinals. They're always going to have fairly bad luck. But judging Kingsbury for being a head coach in that situation is kind of silly now, especially when you look at the fact that they fired their GM out there. They did all kinds of things out there in Arizona, and he's, you know, in a coordinator role now, which is completely different. I have to tell you, I am 100% happy that it wasn't Chip Kelly. I was a little bit worried there for a little while. You know, when I first saw that, I thought to myself, you know, Chip Kelly, okay, maybe this could be okay for an offensive coordinator role. I don't know, though. I mean, he's going to have to make me a little bit more comfortable seeing him as a coordinator. You know, I know he's going up there to, you know, to Ohio State, obviously trying to rebrand himself. So we'll see where that goes. But for now, I'm glad that he's not coming to D.C. At any rate, that's all I got on the coaches right now. Let me know what you guys are thinking down in the comments. Y'all take it easy. Peace.